Aviso importante: o conteúdo a seguir não pertence a este canal. Trata-se de um upload com o único objetivo de preservar e arquivar a história do YouTube no Brasil. Todas as opiniões expressas no vídeo são de responsabilidade exclusiva do autor original. Este canal não endossa nem se responsabiliza pelas falas apresentadas. Aproveite o vídeo.
Eu quero te convidar para uma reflexão. Como você sabe, aconteceu um ataque terrorista em Manchester, no show da Ariana Grande, que é uma artista que tem um público principalmente de crianças e pré-adolescentes. Um maníaco, um filho da puta, decide encher o corpo de explosivos e deixa 60 feridos e 22 mortos. Inclusive uma criança de 8 anos de idade que saiu com a mãe para se divertir um pouco, para ver a artista que ela gostava. 8 anos de idade. Você consegue mensurar o tamanho da perversidade que é explodir crianças e pré-adolescentes? E o Estado Islâmico, com toda a honra, com toda a glória e orgulho, diz: nós explodimos essas crianças para que vocês, infiéis do Ocidente, sintam a espada flamejante de Alá. Você consegue entender o tamanho da deformidade que é sentir honra e glória por explodir crianças e pré-adolescentes? Mas o Islã não é a religião da paz? O Alcorão não diz no capítulo 5, versículo 32, se alguém matar uma pessoa, seria como se matasse toda a humanidade. Se alguém salvar uma vida, seria como se salvasse toda a humanidade. O que eles não dizem para você é que se você ler todo o capítulo e todos os versículos, ele não está tratando de uma pessoa como você, que é um infiel, que não se converteu à religião islâmica. Está falando de um muçulmano. E aí a frase fica assim: se alguém matar um muçulmano, seria como se matasse toda a humanidade. Se alguém salvar a vida de um muçulmano, seria como se salvasse a vida de toda a humanidade. E para o Estado Islâmico, você que é um infiel, você que não se converteu e que deve ser passado no fio da espada, não faz parte aqui do Alcorão, capítulo 5, versículo 32. Mas para eles não é a religião da paz, para o Estado Islâmico não é a religião da paz, isso eles dizem. Não, isso aqui é a religião da paz. O que eles não te dizem é que só vai haver paz no mundo quando todos os infiéis, todos aqueles que não se converterem, se não se converterem, que sejam passados no fio da espada. É assim que o pessoal do Estado Islâmico pensa. Então é a religião da paz. E quando vai haver paz? Quando você for explodido. Aqui no Brasil eles estão prestes a passar a lei da migração. E nós aqui ainda não sofremos a influência, a guerra cultural islâmica. Quando começar, aí você vai ver, cara. E já eles fizeram lá uma manifestação na Paulista, contra essa lei da migração. E o que aconteceu? Foram atacados a bomba. Não, mas isso não é um atentado terrorista, porque a bomba não matou ninguém, era uma bomba pequena. E que define então agora um ataque terrorista é a quantidade de mortos. Se morrer 2 pessoas, se alguém ficar ferido, então não é um ataque terrorista, é o tamanho da bomba. Puta que pariu. Eles já estão relativizando desse jeito. Eu vou recomendar para você algum estudo. Vou colocar aqui algumas informações importantes para que você assista com atenção e alguns estudos. O primeiro livro que eu recomendo, ele está na minha livraria, na minha biblioteca, o link está aqui na descrição, é o Teoria e Tradição da Guerra Justa, do Império Romano até o Estado Islâmico. E o outro livro é uma ficção. É para que você saiba o que seria, por exemplo, a França quando um simpático islâmico, um cara realmente muito articulado, que não é radical, que é simplesmente moderado, o que aconteceria com a França quando ele assumisse o poder ali? quando ele conseguisse, né, estar nos mais altos cargos de poder. O nome desse livro é Submissão. É muito importante que você vá atrás dessas duas leituras. E agora eu vou fornecer para você mais algumas informações. E talvez não, eu tenho certeza que são muito importantes para o teu raciocinar, para o teu refletir.
Have you ever heard this argument? Islam can't be violent because I know a lot of Muslims and none of them are violent, so Islam must not have included violence. Well, this confuses cause and effect. Islam creates Muslims. Muslims don't create Islam. What a Muslim can do is not to practice part of Islam, but that doesn't mean that Islam can be changed by any particular Muslim. So the study of Muslims to learn about Islam I call Muslimology. And you can't really learn anything because you'd have to talk to all 1.5 billion Muslims before you could say, all right, I know what the practice of Islam is. But the practice of Islam doesn't say anything about what the real Islam is. Nothing changes the doctrine. The doctrine includes jihad, and nothing can change that. Just because you know some Muslims who aren't violent doesn't mean that the doctrine of jihad is not there. Now let's be clear about the doctrine of jihad. There are 4 kinds of jihad. Most people, when they think of jihad, just think of what I call jihad of the sword, violence. Well, there are 3 other forms of jihad, and those are jihad of money, speech, and writing. I sat in a mosque in Southern California and watched nearly $20,000 be raised in less than 20 minutes for the purpose of lawfare. That is, using the legal system to harass people such as myself. A lawsuit is launched. There's a lot of money spent on attorneys, but the case never goes to trial. This is lawfare. It is a form of jihad. The Quran is quite clear on this, that those who donate money to jihad derive just as much benefit in Allah's eyes as does those who actually destroy. There's the other form of jihad is speech. When someone tells you, oh, and they're a Muslim, well, Islam is the religion of peace, that is an act of jihad because it is deceptive. It doesn't include the whole truth. Then we have the jihad of the pen, in which maybe it's just a letter to the editor. So jihad can be practiced 4 different ways. Now let's ask ourselves the question, what is the purpose of jihad? The purpose of jihad is to bring about the Sharia. So in America, according to a Pew Research poll, over half, 51% of the Muslims polled in America said they want the Sharia. So this even wanting of the Sharia steps into the arena of jihad. So all of the subtle pressures, let me give you an example of an act of jihad. A Muslim at work complains that people are heating up pork barbecue in the kitchen microwave. Well, you see, the smell of the pork offends the Muslim. And so he goes to Human Resources and says, you know, the smell of pork in the microwave is offending me and I want it to stop. And Human Resources issues a directive that says, okay, henceforth, you can't microwave pork in the company microwave. The complaint about the pork sausage is an act of jihad. So before you say that a Muslim is not practicing jihad, maybe you need to practice and do some study of Islam so that you know what jihad is and what it is not. But there are many forms of jihad, and just because the Muslims you know don't have an AK-47 or a body bomb does not mean that they're not involved in some fashion of trying to bring around the Sharia through many subtle pressures, and those are all acts of jihad. Remember, Muslims don't create Islam. Islam creates Muslims. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Ben Shapiro with Reality Check. A couple of weeks ago, HBO's Bill Maher got into it with the Islamic expert and horrifyingly mediocre actor who should never, ever, 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 ever play Batman, Ben Affleck, over whether Islam was indeed a violent religion. Here's the exchange.
And you painting the whole religion with that same brush.
Let's get down to who has the right answer here. 1 billion people, you say. All these billion people don't hold any of these...
1.5 or something.
Don't hold these pernicious beliefs?
No,
I wouldn't...
Well, they don't.
Of course, he's not alone in taking the PC position that Muslims the world over are tolerant and liberal. He's joined by our president, Barack Obama.
Islam teaches peace. Muslims the world over aspire to live with dignity and a sense of justice.
Wow, it's just like John Lennon's Imagine. Now, the question isn't whether Islam itself is violent. It's what its adherents believe, because that's what they act upon. There's plenty of violent material in the Old and New Testaments. Hey, I'm an Orthodox Jew. I read the Old Testament a lot. But believers in those particular texts are not currently ramming airliners into towers or beheading journalists or mutilating female genitalia. So, let's examine the question. Is radicalism in the Muslim world a tiny minority phenomenon? So to answer that question, we need to define our terms. We're really not talking about people who are active terrorists. Radical beliefs are a lot broader than terrorists, and anybody who argues otherwise is being naive or foolish or disingenuous. But terrorists draw their moral, financial, and religious support from those who are not terrorists themselves. So, who are the radicals? Ben Affleck actually was right on this. There are approximately 1.6 billion Muslims on the planet, and they're from 49 different countries in terms of where they have a majority. All the population stats, by the way, are from Pew Research as of 2011. Indonesia is the world's most populous Muslim country. It's got almost 205 million Muslims living there. According to one 2009 poll, it showed almost 50% of Indonesians actually support strict Sharia law, not just in Indonesia, but in a lot of countries, and 70% blamed the United States, Israel, or somebody else for 9/11. So, you make that calculation, it's about 143 million people who are radicalized. You scared yet? We're just getting started. Okay, Egypt, 80 million Muslims. According to that same 2009 poll, it showed that 65% want strict Sharia law in every Islamic country, and almost 70% said that they had positive or mixed feelings about bin Laden. So that's 55.2 million more radicals. Pakistan has almost 179 million Muslims. 76%, just over three-quarters, want strict Sharia law in all Islamic countries. That is another 135.4 million radicals. Bangladesh, not a country you tend to think of as Muslim, but there are 149 million Muslims living there. As of 2013, just over a quarter said suicide bombings or targeting of civilians was sometimes justified. Another 82% want Sharia to be the official law of the country, and 2/3 said honor killings of women can sometimes be justified. Honor killings, 2/3. It's 121.9 million radicals. Nigeria, 75.7 million Muslims live there. 71% favor Sharia law. That's 53.7 million people. Iran, 74.8 million Muslims. 83% favor implementation of Sharia law as of last year. So that's 62.1 million more radicals. Turkey has 74.7 million Muslims. And 32%, this is a moderate Muslim country, probably the most moderate Muslim country, 32% said honor killings of women could actually be justified sometimes. So that's 23.9 million radical Muslims in our moderate ally, Turkey. Morocco, 32.4 million Muslims live there. Just over three-quarters support Sharia law. That's 24.6 million radical Muslims in Morocco. Iraq, 31.1 million Muslims live there. 78% say honor killings of women can sometimes be justified. That amounts to 24.3 million Muslim radicals. Afghanistan, 24 million people. A huge majority, 76%, support at least occasionally, or just once in a while, honor killings of women. 99% actually want Sharia to be the law of the land. So it's like a Cuban election over there. 24 million radical Muslims over in Afghanistan. Jordan, smaller Muslim country, 6.4 million Muslims. Right now, Hamas is enjoying like a 60% approval rating. So 3.8 million radical Muslims in Jordan, which is, again, a moderate country. Palestinian areas, right? We're sending literally hundreds of millions of dollars to the Palestinian areas. We are, the American taxpayers. 4.3 million Muslims live in the Palestinian areas. 78% of those had positive or mixed feelings about bin Laden. 89% support terror attacks on our ally, Israel. 89% support Sharia law. We should give them a state, folks. That's 3.83 million radical Muslims. How about in the West? Okay, let's take it to France. France, 4.7 million Muslims live there. A 2007 poll showed 35% of French Muslims said suicide bombings could sometimes be justified. It's 1.6 million radical Muslims living in France. Great Britain, 2.8 million Muslims living there. 78% wanted cartoonists of Muhammad legally prosecuted. So we're talking about 2.2 million radical Muslims in Great Britain. How about here in the United States? Well, we have a very moderate Muslim population. We do. 2.6 million Muslims live here, according to Pew Research. 13% said violence against civilians can be justified. 19% said they were either favorable toward al-Qaeda or just didn't know. Because who knows, really? That's almost 500,000 radical Muslims here in the United States. Here is the total of the countries that we've gone through just now. 680,030,000. 680,030,000 radical Muslims. And that's out of a total population in those countries of 942.4 million Muslims total. And it seems fair to assume that similar proportions of people in countries like, say, like Algeria, Syria, Sudan, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Tunisia, Somalia, and Libya are also radicalized. And if they are, then, well, we're above 800 million Muslims who are radicalized. More than half the Muslims on Earth. That's not a minority, that's now a majority, and that's still not even surveying hundreds of millions of Muslims in other countries. In other words, the myth of the tiny radical Muslim minority is just that. It's a myth. And, unfortunately, it's a myth that's going to get a lot of civilized people killed.